Hello! Today we're going to do something just a little bit different. Today I'm going to review the number 29 AFCAR report. And this is the report that talks about the statistics of foster care for the previous year. This generally comes out in July, September, and it will be for the previous year. So this is going to be for 2021. We are currently December 2022. And again, we won't get 2022 statuses until again next July or September. But I found this information very interesting, and I hope that you do. Again, this is just all the statistics of what's going on within foster care nationwide. And so let's just get into it. So the first column that it talks about is the number of children that were in foster care in 2021, and that is 391,000 children that were in foster care in 2021. The interesting thing is this report goes back to 2017, so it goes back a few years, and the highlight was 2018, which was 437,000 children in care. So as you can see, it's significantly dropped over the years, and it continues to drop. That doesn't mean the need's still not great. I'm just letting you know it dropped. So the number of children that entered the foster care system in 2021 was 206,000, down from 263,000 in 2018. And the number of children exiting the foster care system was 214,000, with a high in 2018 of 252,000. So again, you can see the numbers are running about the same. And then the total number of children served by the foster care system. And so what this means is children that may be receiving services, or parents that are receiving services, but the children were never removed. So there's a lot of kids that are a part of the foster care system that never get removed, but they're still being offered services because there was a need or a neglect at that time. And that number is 606,000. I thought that was pretty interesting. So let's break it down for children in foster care in 2021. And again, we'll break it down in different categories. So the median age, the age of the child, was 7 years old. And if we look at sex, 51% of those children were male, 49% were female. If we look at the age by category, this is pretty interesting. 1 year old is the highest percent, and that is at 9%, followed by 2 years old at 8%, and then less than 1 year and 3 years both held 7%. The interesting thing is from basically 4 years old all the way down through 17 years old is somewhere around 4 to 5%. So again, they're not the highest percentage, but if you combine those, that's a greater amount than 3 and under. And I know a lot of people are looking for younger children, but that just goes to show you that is a big chunk, but a bigger chunk is past that. So where were they placed? 44% of the children were placed in a foster home non-relative. 35% of them were placed in a foster home relative. And then the other categories basically dropped down to next to nothing. And then if we look at case goals, reunification was 53% of the time, and adoption was 28% of the time. So again, most of the cases are reunification, as we already know. And then we're going to look at the same format for every category. Race. So 43% of the kids in foster care in 2021 were white, 22% were Hispanic, and 22% were Black or African American. The average time in foster care was 14.9 months. And then if we look at time in care, 19% was 1 to 5 months, 19% was 6 to 11 months, then 14% goes to 12 to 17 months. But here's what I found fascinating. 18 to 23 months was 12%. But you know what else was 12%? 3 to 4 years old. So think about that. That really is a pretty big number for kids being in the system at that time for 3 to 4 years old. Now we're going to break it down and look at children entering the system in 2021, and the average age entering the system was 6 years old. If we look at the age that they entered, the number one spot at 7%, the number one spot was 21% of the kids were less than 1 year old. And then 1 year olds were 7%, 2 year olds, 3 year olds were both 6%, but then again, it stays between 4 and 5% all the way up to 17 years old. So again, even though they're not the largest number of kids, there's still a lot of kids that fall into that category. If we look at race, 46% of them were white, 21% were Hispanic, and 20% of them were black or African American. And then if we look at why they were removed, neglect, no big shocker there, was 63%. Drug abuse was 36%. This one sort of shocked me. Caretaker inability to cope. So that could be mental illness. There could be a lot of things that drive that. That was 14%, and then physical abuse was 12%. And then I'm going to go one more on this, which I thought was really interesting. Housing was 9%. That was a big shock to me. I didn't think that, not being able to have housing put that big of a percentage into the foster care system, but it did. So now we're going to look at children exiting the system in 2021. The average age was 7 years old. If we look at the average age of when they left, the high point at 9% was 2 years old. And then 1 year and 3 year olds left equally at 8% each, and then 4 years old at 7%. But here's what's really interesting. What also equaled 7% was 18 years old. So 7% of foster kids basically aged out of the system last year, which is a big number. It's 15,000 children aged out of the system last year, and so that's sort of a sad fact, but it is what it is. If we look at, again, race as to children leaving the system, whites made up 46%, Hispanics made up 21%, black and African Americans also made up 21%. And if we look at why they left, 47% were reunified with their primary caregiver, 25% were adopted, and then it sort of just goes on from there. And then if we look at time in care for the kids that left, I thought this was very fascinating. 17.5 months was the average time in care, and if we break that down by the actual timeline, the number one was 12 to 17 months at 17%, and then 6 to 11 months at 16%, and then 18 to 23 months at 14%. But again, 12% for 1 to 5 months, which I thought was interesting, but 12% were in care 3 to 4 years. Again, a very, very, very large number of kids in the system for quite a long period of time. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is children waiting to be adopted. The average age was 7 years old. The average age that they entered the foster care system was 4 years old. And if we break down their average age entering the system, we're going to look at what that average age was. 9%, 1 years old and 2 year old both held 9% share. 3 years old held 8% share. And then 4 years old held a 7% share. And then basically everything else almost held a 4 to 5% share. So again, I know those younger children greater number, they're a higher percentage, but if you add, past 3 years old and you add all those together, that's actually a greater chunk of children than the younger ones. Oh, I'm sorry, that was the age that they are at this time. The age that they entered the system, meaning, so they've been in the system, those numbers were the age that they are now. If we look at the age entering the system, 27% were less than 1 year. And so think about that. 2 years old was 1 year old and 2 year old was the highest percentage waiting to be adopted, and the highest percentage is less than a year coming in. Number 2 is 1 year old. 1 year old at 8%, 2 year olds at 7%, and then again from about 12 years to 3 years old, all hold about 6% waiting to be adopted. So if we look at where are these children placed currently, 28%, or excuse me, let's start with a high. 51% of them are in a foster home non-relative. 28% of them are in a foster home relative. 13% of them are in a pre-adoption home. If I look at males, 52% of these children are male, 48% are female, and if we look at race, white make up 43%, Hispanics make up 23%, and black African Americans make up 21%. So if you found this interesting, I'm going to put a link to the entire report. There's a lot more data in the report that I'm covering. I just thought that this was very fascinating information. I thought you might like to see it. It sort of sheds a light on the state of the system and where kids are. And so if you just look at the top numbers on all these things, it looks like that the real need is in all these categories is from 1 month old to about 3 or 4 years old. But the reality is that on almost all of these categories, from 4-year-olds to 17-year-olds, that makes up a greater chunk or a greater percentage of kids coming into the system. It's just that smaller group, that 0 to 3-year-old is where we see the biggest percentage. But again, as far as individual ages, but if you combine from 4 to 17, that's still the bulk of children coming into the system. I hope you like this content. If you did, give me a big thumbs up. I'm constantly making new videos to try to inform you in what's going on with foster care and to help you be the best foster parent you can be.